So this is a short video to talk about focal length and depth of field. And the reason we want to talk about this is because we don't always want to see everything in a shot. And the camera is a very powerful tool, and how you use the camera and what you focus on can make the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful shot. So let's first of all understand what focal length is and how we can use it to our advantage. So what is depth of field? The depth of field is the bit of the image that you're looking at that is in focus. So with a narrow depth of field, only a small part of the image will be in focus. With a wide depth of field, most or all of the image is in focus. So obviously with a narrow depth of field, you're going to be focusing on less in the image than you are with a wide depth of field. So if we consider these three butterflies here, the two on the left, or the one on the left and the one on the right, are out of focus. The only one that's in focus is the one in the middle, vis-a-vis the camera on the left. So that is a narrow depth of field. So this all comes from camera lenses, and if you're a camera expert, all of this will be second nature to you. But obviously, if you're an animator without a lot of cinematography or camera experience, this is all going to be new stuff for you. So what kind of depth of field is this? This is obviously a narrow depth of field because we're just focusing on the flowers, as opposed to the next image I'm going to show you in a minute, which is a wide depth of field, where we can see the background very clearly. Now, which of these is better? For our purposes, probably the former is better, because if we just want to focus on the flowers, we don't want to see all the stuff in the background because it starts to distract us. We're just going to start to look in the vegetation behind rather than what we're looking at in the foreground. And as a filmmaker, your job is to guide the audience. You put, as Chris Wedge used to say on robots, you put blinkers on the audience. You only show them what you want them to see. So if you don't want them looking at the background, then blur it out. So what's a normal camera lens? It's about 50mm lens is approximately a normal lens. 70mm lens, good for portraits. Short lens, 35 or less, good for action shots. These are just general rules of thumb. So what about this one? What's the depth of field here? Is this short or wide? Obviously this is a short lens because we're just looking at the boy. We're not looking at the background behind him. And this is going to be very useful for animation in many ways, because if you're blurring out the background, the audience isn't going to be looking at it. Unless, of course, you really want the audience to look at the background, and then you might want to keep it in focus. So we can look at some famous filmmakers. This is taken from Citizen Kane. This is by the great Orson Welles, and this is very deep focus because you can see everything in the foreground and you can also see everything in the background, the little boy through the window, and that's very deliberate. We want to see the little boy through the window here, so it's very important that he's in focus. This is what Kane called, this is what Orson Welles called deep focus. Narrow depth of field or shallow depth of field, we're just looking at the thing in the middle, not the stuff in the distance and not the stuff in the foreground. With a rack focus, you can blur between the two. So rack focus, you change the shot from a narrow depth of field from the background to the foreground. This was a famous shot in The Lion King where Disney used a rack focus for the first time, blurring out the zebras in the beginning of the shot and then blurring out the ants at the end of the shot. It was famous because they were taking live action cinematography techniques and using them in animation. So that's the end of the slideshow. The key takeaway from this is remember, if you have a particularly busy background and you just want the audience to look at the bit of action that's going on in the foreground, then use a shallow depth of field so you blur out the background, and that way the audience won't be distracted by everything that's going on the screen.